The Florida Department of Education may require students to prove they are in the country legally before they can enroll in any of the state's 28 colleges. That move would effectively block undocumented students from attending. A similar proposal was introduced during the legislative session earlier this year, but Senate Bill 1052 never made it through committee and died in March. Right now, the state is moving forward with a different process that doesn't involve bills or laws. The Education Department published a rule they say clarifies criteria for admission into the Florida college system. This proposed rule was published in April as an administrative change. That kicked off a 21-day period for written public comment, which ends today. There's a public hearing at the Florida State Board of Education's meeting on Thursday, May 14th at Miami-Dade College. From there, the board, which is appointed by the governor, is expected to make a final decision on the rule change. Supporters say it's about enforcing immigration laws, and public institutions funded by taxpayers should prioritize U.S. citizens and people with lawful immigration status. Critics call it cruel and counterproductive. Gabby Pacheco is president and CEO of the Dream.us, a college and career program supporting undocumented students who came to the United States as children, often referred to as dreamers. Gabby was once one of those students. She was undocumented when she went through Florida's college system and graduated from Miami-Dade College.
When I was in high school, my college counselor actually said, "Hey, you're going to waste your time trying to go to college. You're not going to be able to. Just resign yourself with that idea and go to work." And go to work for me was, and I did do a lot of this when I was in college, but it was catering, it was waiting tables, it was babysitting. And there's nothing wrong with those jobs, but getting paid $7 an hour at that time, right, was just not something that was going to allow me to be able to have the things that I have today. And it was my college education, was my college degree. It was the experiences and the networks and the professors and the ideas that got me to where I am today.
Are you hearing from Central Florida students? What are you hearing from people on the ground about this proposed rule?
They just don't get it. They don't understand why would we ban a student, a young person? Why would we clip their wings? Somebody on our post said, well, they can just pay for it. And we're like, sir, it's not even that they won't be able to pay for it, except they're going to be banned altogether from accessing higher education. Like, where is the fairness? Where is all the progress that we've made? We are going backwards into the 1950s and 60s where Black students weren't allowed to go to colleges. Nobody's asking for these students to have a free ride. They're just asking for access.
This rule was introduced through a written notice, and you've said this is an attempt to get around the legislature. Tell me more about why and why that concerns you.
Well, it's very frustrating. Senator Erin Grall actually submitted this language, and it didn't even get heard in committee. Her Republican, mind you, the legislature has been led by Republicans for close to 3 decades. They said no. And they're going over Danny Perez, the Speaker of the House, and all the legislators. And so it is really hard to see that the governor is pushing this down. And this is the ironic part. The actual voting on May 14th is going to be at Miami-Dade College. It's an insult to our community here in South Florida that we know the majority of the students that go to Miami-Dade College are immigrants or children of immigrants. That majority of them, this is the place, when you talk to anybody, right, from Orlando, they talk about Valencia College, Seminole. All these institutions have been the gateway for many of people to be able to be who they are today. And to completely ban them and say no and go around the state legislature, the governor doing that, I think it's an insult to all of us.
Supporters argue this is about enforcing the law. How do you respond to that argument?
I want to know who's the supporter of this. I haven't heard anybody supporting this.
What do you think this means, not just for the students, for the communities and the workforce in Florida?
When a young person, a 14, 15-year-old, sits down next to their classmates when they're studying for the SAT and the ACT and they're getting ready to finish high school because the next step is college, and they have no future and they have no prospect of being able to do that, we're going to start seeing young people dropping out of high school. We're going to start seeing young people losing hope and a whole entire generation of young folks who are just, we're going to miss out on their talent. And so to clip their wings, it is clipping the wings of the state of Florida. And more importantly, regardless of their immigration status, when you deny access to education, which should be a basic right for anybody, we know that how powerful education is. Florida is shooting itself.
So, if a student in Florida is listening right now and feeling uncertain about their future, what would you want them to hear now?
We want them to hear that they are institutions that are private institutions, that are online institutions that are ready and willing to help because they know the caliber of the student. Dreamers tend to understand and know the situation that they're in. They know the opportunity, how grateful they are. And so they work twice as hard. And that's been the case in the state of Florida. Today, we have dreamers that are doctors, that are nurses, that are teachers, that are working in all kinds of industry in the state of Florida. And it is just really, really sad that this is very short sighted. This is not going to curb illegal immigration. No parent, when they say we're going to move to the United States to seek safety, starts thinking and says, in 15 years, when my child graduates, they'll be able to go to college because there's a law that would allow them to do that. That's just ludicrous. Like people don't think like that.
Gabby Pacheco became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 2023. She's based in Florida and president and CEO of the Dream.us. Data from the Higher Ed Immigration Portal shows nearly 50,000 undocumented students in higher education in Florida, and about a third are eligible for DACA, the federal program that temporarily protects some immigrants brought to the U.S. as children from deportation. The rule change would require students applying to Florida's 28 state colleges to prove they're citizens or lawfully present before admission. It also gives those schools the ability to deny applicants based on past conduct if they decide it is in the best interest of the institution. To understand how significant the changes are and what authority the state actually has over college admissions, we're talking to Larry Walker. He's an associate professor of education at UCF and studies higher education policy.
The new rule potentially could impact tens of thousands of students in the state. And obviously, there are a number of possible implications, not just simply these students being, admitted to school, but what are the long-term economic impact on the institutions in the region in general, which is another thing that we'll have to consider.
This is being done through a rule and not a law. Can you talk about why that matters, why the department is enacting a rule?
There are a couple of reasons where obviously it aligns with some of the political discourse we hear in the state and nationally. And I think that this is a way they just want to kind of codify it. And also in terms of implementation, this moves forward, then certainly it's going to impact students who are undocumented individuals who are hoping to start school in August. And I just think it's kind of streamlines the process a bit.
So, can the Department of Education do this on its own without lawmakers passing a law?
This is one of the many questions we faced the last couple of years and recently about, what various agencies can and cannot do. So I'm sure that they believe and talk to their legal folks that they can do this. So the question is, as always, what do the lawsuits look like and what happens? Because undoubtedly this will be challenged. We'll certainly see how this plays out if and when it's implemented, and then what are the legal ramifications after that.
Do the individual colleges have any room to push back on this?
It's going to be very difficult because anytime you're fighting against a state agency, and in some cases the federal government, those who have control of the purse strings, it's very hard to push back, and that's why you haven't heard any really besides various organizations that advocate for maybe certain higher education institutions, certainly those who advocate for undocumented students, that you haven't really heard from leaders of post-secondary institutions because they understand, particularly considering the current environment, that if they push back, they will face certain challenges, and I think that that's just the reality of the political environment today.
You mentioned the potential for challenges and lawsuits to be filed. So, under current U.S. law, children are entitled to a public education regardless of immigration status. That's K through 12 students being protected regardless of their status. Does that same idea apply to college legally, or is it a different level?
Well, I'm a former congressional staffer, so I'll put that hat on for a second. So I would think that some people will argue, certainly those who support this rule, that it does not. And certainly they're going individuals who want to argue the counter to that, that it should include individuals. But in terms of the language, I'm quite sure there are plenty of those individuals in the state who argue that these students are not protected by that particular language.
As we're talking about colleges because this applies to state colleges, not universities. Why the distinction there?
I think that's a really important question. I think this is one of those things that we've seen in Florida and nationally, is that sometimes when it comes to these certain laws, that this becomes an initial step. So the first step is impacting those 28 institutions, and then maybe follow up the next legislative session, depending on how this plays out. Maybe then you're looking at a total state ban. In my opinion, I think that's what we're looking at. Is it an initial step for a certain number of institutions, and then a secondary step at some point to include all post-secondary institutions?
You talked about the impacts of this rule. There are concerns being raised about how this could affect GED and adult education programs. What do you see as some of the impacts, the ripple effects?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that people don't consider. I think 10 to 15% of them, you look at the statistics, are some are pursuing advanced degrees, and some of them in various fields that are needed. In this country, it's all about the economy. Those individuals will not be able to complete those degrees, and that means the wages won't be as high. Those institutions will not get benefit from the money those students are paying. That could impact faculty and staff, hiring and retention challenges. It could also have a programmatic impact. But obviously, this particular policy is in line with what we've seen not only the state of Florida but nationally. Ultimately, for me, what is the overall economic impact on these post-secondary institutions, and then generally the local, regional, and state economy.
Who would benefit from a policy like this?
So I think that's going to be the question for those who decide if this is important to be implemented. This country consistently has been focused on who and what drives the economic engine, and so if if you're making an argument that this policy is needed, I think one of the things is like, what's the cost benefit analysis? Like, what would it cost the state in terms of long-term money? Like, if you look at, after those students graduate, going to get degrees, get jobs, buy cars, houses, etc., what's going to be the impact? Because you're talking about tens of thousands of students. The other thing is also, what is in terms of how you measure what those students bring overall to the culture of those institutions, and that's missing. So I think those are just some of the issues that you have to consider. What does it say about when a government, in terms of ideology, makes a certain shift and how that impacts students? But once again, the individuals who developed this rule believe this is in the best interest of all Floridians, so we'll see how it plays out.
There's also part of this rule that would let colleges deny admission based on a student's past misconduct if it is considered in the school's best interest. Is that a significant change?
It is, and I found that language is very broad in terms of even also some of the language they've had in relating to proving citizenship. And so, as someone in higher ed, I am very interested in how colleges interpret that.
Any thoughts for why that language was included?
I went back and looked at it, and I'm not really clear. I mean, I think one of the things you have to remember is that post-secondary institutions, students are required to indicate they have had some kind of criminal past. They face certain challenges. Sometimes students feel like they can share that as part of their journey in their personal statement. But if a student has some kind of criminal record, those are the kinds of things they have to make admissions staff aware. So why that language is included, universities already have admissions, et cetera, already have the authority certainly to deny a student if they think that their admission will be problematic and cause harm to other students. So I'll be very interested to see how this is interpreted and how it plays out at these institutions.
So at the end of the day, how much does this change who gets access to college in Florida?
We talked about the language in terms of behavior by students prior to attending the institution, and then some of the language in this rule as it relates to proving citizenship, which students already have to provide documentation. I think the question is how, once again, institutions interpret some of this, how it plays out those institutions, and will institutions who don't properly interpret that, are there certain kind of implications in terms of how the state may view in a way in which they didn't properly understand what the rule meant. And so we won't really know what that looks like. It'll probably take a couple of years to kind of think play out this rule takes effect. But certainly students who are planning on attending an institution in the fall will be impacted, and we'll just see how it overall plays out.
Larry Walker is Associate Professor and Doctoral Program Coordinator in the Department of Educational Leadership in Higher Education at UCF. The Florida Department of Education says it does not expect the proposal to create significant economic costs or require a formal financial impact study. In response to the rule, the nonpartisan Florida Policy Institute said students and their families lose out on lifetime earnings and improved financial stability. Community colleges lose out on tuition and fees that would have been paid by students, and communities lose out on future tax revenue and economic activity. We reached out to state colleges in Central Florida to ask how they're responding to the rule. Seminole State College sent us this statement. We understand this proposal may raise questions for current and prospective students and their families. Seminole State College is carefully reviewing the proposed rule to ensure continued compliance with all state and federal requirements while maintaining our commitment to student access and success. If the rule is approved, the college will coordinate with the Florida Department of Education and system partners to understand implementation requirements and make any necessary adjustments. The College of Central Florida told us they don't have anyone available to comment on this topic to meet our deadline. We never heard back from Daytona State College, Valencia, Polk State, or Lake Sumter State College.